Welcome to ET 454 Project Management. My name is Dr. James McCarahan, providing this class and these lectures. In this second lecture, we're going to talk about the information, the knowledge that you need to know to assemble a business case once a project idea has been developed. Okay, the business case is something that's going to be presented by somebody to executive management in an organization to get them to initially promote a project charter, which means that it's a signing off of a project saying, hey, we need to do something here. Okay, so with that said, we will move on. So what's covered in this presentation? In this presentation, we're going to ask some questions and then address those questions. So the beginning of it involves determining when something is amiss in your organization, so that you notice it and then you figure out, okay, well, what do I need to do, and is my observation is it correct? Okay, so we're involved with determining when something is amiss to do a business case, and then to begin to initiate a project. And then we'll ask, how do we know stuff internally about our organization before a business case is undertaken, leading to the project? Next thing is, how do we know stuff externally about our organization before we undertake the business case? Again, lots of organizations, people are doing their job, upper management's involved with actually doing their job, but a lot of times they don't know what's going on in the trenches of their organization, and they are not operating optimally. The next thing is communication techniques that are involved in organizations. These communication techniques are important later on when I talk about other aspects of project management, but it's one of those things I identify right now so you get a background, and I'll try to refer to later in other presentations about these communication techniques. So what are the communication techniques? It is categorized as push versus pull, and then there is formal versus informal communications. Next, we need to identify what a product sponsor is and what a project sponsor is. And so we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about who is responsible actually for developing the business case. So how do we know something is amiss? Okay, in your day-to-day activities at work, in school, at home, you'll notice something is not correct. Well, the organized way to determine if something is amiss in an organization is to use these methods. Okay, so the first method that can be used is benchmarking. Benchmarking, at least from a manufacturing perspective, is a comparison of our organization, our products, and our practices and processes and performance to the best in class. Okay, so for, let's say, Indiana State, I don't know if we're considered best in class. I think we are for social mobility. Other universities might want to ask, they go, okay, what university is the best for social mobility? And they'll go, oh, it's Indiana State. Well, what did they do to make it first towards social mobility? Okay, in terms of project management, though, benchmarking can just be looking at similar competitors or similar people in the marketplace, what other people are doing, what other organizations are doing, and picking and choosing the good things and the bad things that they do, and evaluating ourselves against other organizations. That sort of lends itself to competitive analysis, and so competitive analysis is slightly different than benchmarking, whereas competitive analysis is looking across a market. Okay, so for Indiana State, across the market might be the entire educational system, how we perform in Indiana, or versus other universities in Indiana, or how we perform against other universities in the Midwest that are the same size that we are or have the same programs. Okay, next thing would be document analysis, and that would be looking internally at the documents, the policies, the procedures, and the things that we have, and identifying and say, okay, there's a gap here that needs to be addressed. Are people aware that there's a gap here, or there's a promise? Okay, so document analysis is a very effective way to identifying it when something comes up and you look at the policy procedure and you go, oh, there's nothing that addresses this. So then you have to go through the process and go, okay, how are we going to address this issue? And how are we going to remedy this for future instances? Interviews. Interviews is one of the most single important things, especially internally to a company. Okay, there are formal and informal interviews, and all of these are, and that's called an elicitation technique. Okay, and you can identify from your stakeholders, like we talked about in the last lecture, who are the important people, who are the important stakeholders that would be influenced or impacted by our project. And so you might want to ask them, say, what's wrong? What's wrong internally with their organization? What's wrong with the market? What's going on in what's called, from a strategic standpoint, an environmental scan? What's going on in society, and are we meeting a need or are we not meeting a need? And maybe that's the gap or the threat that we could address. And it's also, did you know about this? Okay, something you say or you think is wrong, and you go, okay, here's what I saw, and I think this might be wrong. Do you think it's wrong? So you're asking them their thoughts on it. And then you ask what their thoughts are on this instance that you brought up that's a opportunity, a gap, or a threat. And you document all this information and you try to put it all together and make sense of it. Next thing is you do a reassessment of your business goals and objectives. Every organization is going to have business goals and objectives, whether it's for-profit, academia, non-for-profit, what have you. Okay, and so you ask, we see something happening. Does this mean that we are not meeting our business needs? We're not meeting our business goals. You ask things that are qualitative and quantitative. For instance, quantitative might be, are our profits falling off? If the bottom line is getting impacted, yeah, there's something wrong. Okay. For instance, with education, why is enrollment falling? And actually, that's happening across the United States. Part of the problem is you have less people that were born at about this time, 18 to 20 years ago, so they're not going into, there's not enough people that would house our university system. So why is enrollment falling, and what might we do about versus what analysis is telling us? So those would be things to investigate to let us know if something is wrong. So what will we cover in this section? Okay, we're going to talk about prior requirements and the knowledge you need to have to develop your business case. Okay, so a needs assessment. We need to conduct a needs assessment. How is it done? Well, here's the steps. Okay, so you identify the problem, the opportunity, or threat. In essence, you make a statement and say, this has occurred. I think this is a threat. I think it's an opportunity, or it might be a gap in our performance. And I think it needs to be addressed because it has implications towards our organization. Next thing, you develop the current state. You provide a situation statement. And I will give a brief, somewhat ugly example of a situation statement. But a situation statement kind of covers who, what, when, where, how, and why. And that tells you here is how we're actually conducting our business or our organization. And you can even mention why there's a gap that you're seeing occurring. Next thing, you develop or you determine what would a future state be. So if you have a gap, an opportunity, or a threat, what might be done that what would occur that would say, okay, we're operating optimally and we've remedied the issue that's been involved. You would be descriptive when you talk about this. So you would paint a picture with words to identify what the future state would look like. Next, step 4, determine variable options and provide a recommended, that would be one recommendation based upon the evidence that you've provided. Next, step 5 would be to facilitate the development of a product roadmap. with the product roadmap, you would need to be knowledgeable on the different types of approaches, like I talked about in the first lecture. Okay, whether you're going to use a waterfall approach, an iterative approach, an incremental approach, or a hybrid approach. And if you notice on the right side of the slides over here, okay, so we're talking about over on this side. Okay, I have a definition. A product roadmap is a shared source of truth that outlines the vision, direction, priorities, and the progress of a product or the project over time. And so what you're seeing here in this first example is, you're seeing this is in essence kind of like a Gantt chart, and it's highlighting per the year the steps and phases that would be involved. And notice it talks about the risks that might be involved. So this would likely not be a waterfall. This might be an incremental approach or an iterative approach. And it tells you that the things that could be done, and what is high value, high risk, and things of that nature. And then it gives you color coding to identify these aspects. At the bottom here, we have another example of an iterative approach. Okay, and it's showing you that this is a long project. It's in essence going to be 5 years long. And so it's saying, it's giving a process map of what we need to do to address this project. So first we identify key problems, you figure out the objectives to address it, then you come up with solutions, you gain as much knowledge. In other words, you're going to do research on the project or the problem. Then you're going to build some type of product or method or process for addressing the problem. And then this is saying iterate. So this may be you have to do something over and over and over again to get it right, whatever issue you're addressing. Okay, and then you address a product backlog. And a product backlog we're going to talk about later on, but a product backlog is part of doing the iterative process, and it's just identifying individual tasks or activities that need to be accomplished to get done with a certain phase or a certain iteration. And we'll talk about that later on. The term sprint is involved. We'll talk about sprint, and the sprint is maybe a 1 week to 4 week type of length, where you might meet weekly and say, okay, here was the product backlog. My team members, let's say you have 4 team members, and person A on the team is going to address one thing, person B is going to address the other thing, and so on and so forth. And you would say, okay, here's what I worked on last week, here's what I'm working on, here's what I hope to get done today or tomorrow, and then I will report back to you any problems that I've had. Okay, so that would be a sprint, talking about the product backlog. And then what would happen, you go into your sprint execution, you do the things that you were talking about in it. You might figure out, okay, are we ready to do this? And I'll talk about the definition called definition of ready. Do I have all the things aligned to be able to work on this thing? And then if you're done, you have something called the definition of done, and that would be a checklist to say, okay, here's all the things that we were going to do in whatever my work package. I've got those accomplished. So by checking my list, it looks like we are done. And I review, make sure what we were working on was correct. That would be the project manager. Take a look at what people were doing, and then go, yeah, okay, we're done. And then the process would start all over again. But this is a long, drawn-out process, and it's looking like this iterative. They're just including and going, the circular process in 3 for their iterations to get to years 4 and 5. Okay. So once you have all that information together and you've conjectured as to what your approach is going to be and how you would conduct that approach, you would develop your business case. After the business case is developed, then you would promote a project charter. Okay, the project charter, it's a process of collaborating for charter development with a sponsoring entity. Okay, so once the business case is talked about by executive management stakeholders, they'll likely identify and go, okay, let's say, Susan, this problem is related to your department. We ask that you be the project sponsor. And as a project sponsor, you will be the go-to person that'll communicate between the executive management team and the project manager. Okay, so in this process, collaborating for a charter development with a sponsoring entity, typically a member of executive management and stakeholder, with resources using business analysis, knowledge, experience, and product information. So, needs assessment. So we're talking about the needs assessment. We're going to put it in the business case. All right, so we'll do a business analysis, and generally speaking, there might be a business analyst that is used. That would be sort of a numbers person that is intimately knowledgeable on our organization and the numbers related to it. Whether profit, loss, things like that. Maybe an actual accountant or a financial type. And so what we would do is we might use this person to assess the business value of the problem or opportunity or threat at hand. Okay, so you go to this person. They might be a part of the executive management team. They may be an underling of them, and you would say, okay, we noticed this, and so we need for you to assess whether this issue has a business value to it. Okay, and so how we might do that is based upon the elicitation research. And that's that methodology that I talked about before. The only thing that is different that I didn't include with it was building a prototype. So prototyping. Prototype means the first of something. Okay, so you might have a prototype of, if it's a cell phone and you want to put an app on a cell phone, you might develop some kind of wire diagram, or wireframe is what it's called in project management, and it tells about all the stuff that's involved with it. So that's the term prototype, and we'll talk about it later on. Okay, you also do an assessment of your enterprise environmental factors. From PMI, they call it EEF as an acronym, and part of EEFs are the political climate. Obviously, the difference from going from Joe Biden to Trump, they have different priorities. They have different needs and wants and things like that. So something that is related to what Joe Biden wants might be different to what Donald Trump might want. Okay, so that would be the political climate, and you can think internally of your own organization. If you get a change of a manager or a boss, how is that going to influence you as a worker? They might have a different way of doing it from the previous person. Okay, you assess the market conditions. All right, if we are one of 3 products in a market and we are falling behind other products, let's say like with Bud Light. Okay, we kind of know what happened with Bud Light. I don't think they did very good assessment of that by, they alienated people, and then they fell from number 1 to something like number 3 now, I saw on the news. Well, that was, I think there was poor market assessment that was done there. Organizational culture, you have to ask, okay, is our organization ready? Do we have the people to be able to do or address the need? And if not, what are we going to do? Are we going to use third-party help? Things of that nature. The existing infrastructure. Okay, we'll talk about different infrastructures of organizations later, but it's one of those things if you're going to do a waterfall approach, which is a pretty linear approach, you might have the people in place. If this is a problem that has a lot of problems to be solved, and your people are dedicated in what's called in project management functional management functions or positions, that might not be a good fit for it. So that would be identifying the existing structure. You would investigate government regulations. So if an issue comes up, you might see if there is something that has occurred either by government that is impacting your product or whatever you're doing, and that might be an issue. You find out if there are available human resources. A lot of companies don't have project management offices. Project management offices would be someplace that is related to human resources. They might have templates, they might have people that have had experience doing projects, and so you would evaluate if you can get help like that. And then you look at company policies and procedures. If you're going to drastically impact or suggest doing something to your product, you might want to see if that's in violation of your goals, your objectives, and any company policies and procedures. Or you may need to think, well, I need to address and update policies and procedures. And then you have to assess the organizational process assets of your organization that wants to undergo a project. And so organizational process assets refer to the collection of internal knowledge. You look at the documents, the processes, the policies, the tools that an organization uses to process and utilize and manage projects. And that would include using historical data. If you're undergoing a project that's already been undertaken once, you might use that to make your project a whole lot more efficient and easier. You look for templates. Some companies may have a business case template that executive management likes to do. It's clear and concise, and it's a good way to get a project started. You have what's called lessons learned, and lessons learned from a project management standpoint is, okay, we've undertaken a project just like this before. What do we learn? What can we use to improve upon the process this time? And then you talk about standard procedures, and you figure out, okay, so what procedures are we going to use to initiate this project? Benchmarking, what is it, and what are the types of benchmarking? So benchmarking is a comparison of an organization's practices, processes, and measurements of results against established standards or against what is achieved by a best-in-class organization within industry or across industries. Okay, big glorified thing. So what types are there? There's performance benchmarking, compares quantitatively data, generally KPIs, key performance indicators across an industry. There's practice benchmarking that compares qualitatively information about people, processes, and technology. There's internal benchmarking, there's external benchmarking, competitive benchmarking, functional benchmarking, that means comparing within an organization one department against another. Strategic, that's comparing your organization against the best in class of all places. And then financial, and that is looking at the finances of peer industry and historical data. Another thing that is done is competitive analysis. Competitive analysis is a technique for obtaining information and analyzing information about an organization from the internal and external environment. I'll just cut to the chase here. Everybody, well, it seems like everybody knows what SWOT analysis is. Oftentimes, it's not used correctly. Oftentimes, when an organization does SWOT analysis, they do it internally. A lot of times, it should be done internally and externally. You need to know what others see and say about you to do an effective SWOT. So, we'll just go over briefly, okay? So, internally, there should be an assessment of strengths and weaknesses. You identify what your organization does well, okay, or your product does well, whatever you're producing and whatever is involved with the project. You also analyze what doesn't it do well. Where is it lacking? Is there a capability issue? Okay. You assess the qualities that make you better than your competitors, and you assess where you think you are weaker than your competitors. You also identify the necessary resources like your skills, your knowledge, your information assets, your equipment assets, your facilities, your capabilities, and you also identify how and why you're limited with your resources. And also you assess where you're strong in those type of resources and where you're weak in those positions. And then often external analysis is done by somebody. You hire somebody that's a third party, and you go, okay, well, what do you see about us compared to other organizations or another product? And so they give a different observation. But what happens a lot of time is SWOT analysis is done internally, and it's not effective when it happens. So I'm just emphasizing that because all too often, whether I've done consulting, multiple companies or what have you, they'll go, oh, well, here is a SWOT analysis. And they do it, but they did it to themselves with especially the opportunities and threats. And that leads to bias of their own and even groupthink. So, okay, with that said, so competitive analysis. Another thing that needs to be assessed is document analysis. I'm not going to read through all of that. You can go back and read through the presentation. But what I've done is on the right-hand side, I've provided from a case study of launching a new airline. Okay, I think most people have probably traveled on an airline, and you know there's a difference from, let's say, Allegiant versus Southwest versus Sprint versus Frontier, and so on and so forth. Okay, and so some will when you go to board, you may have to check your baggage, make sure it's a certain size, or they'll charge you. You may have to group in a certain way. Some zones get on first. Some will charge you for drinks, some won't charge you for drinks or food or what have you. Okay, so they have all done a competitive analysis, and they're trying to find their own niche for their way to make profits. So here's a case for a new airline. So they're looking at their air tickets and trying to figure out what is most effective to have on their tickets. Okay, so when you do a boarding pass, to make sure that they can maximize their capability. So they're looking at a printed document, the nature of it. It's a travel authorization. It gives credibility so you can get on an airline, and the name of this particular hypothetical airline is Indigo. Okay, so you do analysis of what do we need to have on here. And so at the bottom left-hand side, if you notice down here, it says passenger information, their name, probably their seat number, when they're going to load. They're going to give classifications as descriptors of the individuals, and so on and so forth. And then from that basic information, they develop what they might use as their own boarding pass or their airline ticket, and it tells you the name of the airline, their name, other identifiers, and things like that. So that's what is meant by, or an example of, document analysis. And really, what's the objective of document analysis? The objective is to identify and review the most relevant information to support your analysis or your cause or your case or what's going to go into your business case. So prototyping, I didn't talk about it before, I'll talk about it now. Prototyping is creating a working model or an early version of a product or a product's features. Okay, it allows the team to test and gather, validate ideas, gather feedback from a stakeholder, typically a customer, and then make adjustments so that it's something ideal and unique for the customer to buy into or to ultimately buy or use. Okay, so a business case. What do we need to know? Okay, first we need to know our business goals and our objectives. We need to align everything we're going to do, especially for a project idea, with our goals and objectives. You need to have a situation statement. Okay, this goes in the business case. Okay, so situation statement, it provides an objective statement about the current state of the situation. It explains why a project might need to be used to improve upon a problem and provides what impact will make on the market and organization. I have a little example here, kind of it's quick and ugly, but it kind of gives you a flavor of what it needs to be. Should be concise, should be short, but it should hit all of the relevant factors. So this is saying our product, whatever that product is, was originally designed to perform a certain way to get a particular results and provide a profit. We have observed in these ways that the product isn't meeting our expectations, which is causing this negative impact. And this negative impact to our business over this period of time and due to these reasons. How we might adjust our strategies and ways to win or be competitive so that our customers are more successful are determined by measuring these changes in our behavior or the product we provide, and with improved outcomes and improvement performance. So that's kind of a quick and ugly. Next, we assess the capabilities of our people, the equipment, the processes, the knowledge, and the assets that we have within an organization. Do we have the capability to undertake this project and get a desired outcome? And will we need to improve once we've done this project and have have additional people or equipment, processes, and knowledge? You need to have a vision. A vision is provides a description of the future state. Provided this project is successful, here's what the outcome is going to look like. And then next, you need to have strategic information concerning how your product or the improvements to it make it better and how it improves your market position. Okay, part 2, prior requirements to business case. Okay, so we need to know or have the knowledge of our relationships, how our outcome of the project to improve the situation relates to the programs in our portfolio, our customers, our organization, the marketplace, and so forth. We need to have, again, a product vision, if not just a vision for the project, a product vision, the outcome, the features that it will have, who are the intended customers, the customer needs, and how we are going to fulfill our business goals. Then we need to identify what criteria can be measured to say we have been successful in what we've started out with this project. We need to look at or have a understanding of our enterprise and our business architecture. I talked about that earlier with the EFF and the OPAs. And then we need to identify our enterprise and business structure. What is our structure? Is it adaptable? It might not be adaptable if you only have a certain amount of places. What's going on a lot in societies right now is people are just going hell-bent on lean. And lean doesn't necessarily mean an organization is going to be more effective. Sometimes you're cutting out people for the wrong reasons, and that has to go with not understanding the processes of an organization. You have to understand those processes. Okay, so with that said, I bring up the concept of a product vision board. That would have to go under Agile for product vision board. And so this might say, here is our target group that when we do this project we're going to address. Here's the needs of that project group. Here is the product that we are going to provide, and then attach the business goals so they all align with it. And then something like this can easily lend itself to being a product backlog when you get to either incremental or iterative project planning. And I have down here, this is showing a hierarchical strict structure, just to let you know what your business enterprise might be. In this section, I'll talk about internally assessed strengths and weaknesses. So, how do we assess internal strengths and weaknesses? We do it by a process called elicitation. That's what it's called in project management. It's process in project management and involves gathering and documenting the needs and expectations of stakeholders for a project. So we've talked, there's brainstorming, there's prototyping, document analysis, interface analysis, and that's a technique that involves comparing requirements from existing systems to extended systems. It's often used with software development, observation, and workshops. And workshops a technique that involves stakeholders coming together to ensure effective communication and reach a consensus on a topic. Other elicitation techniques used include stakeholder identification, and specifically the use of a RACI chart, R-A-C-I, and the acronym means responsible, so identifying what stakeholder is responsible, who is held accountable, who should be consulted, and who should be informed about something. Survey, the written set of questions that are pointed to respondents to get their input on it. It's a group decision-making device. And then focus groups, which uses qualitative analysis. In other words, you may rate something from 1 to 5, with 1 being bad, 5 being good, to get people's feedback, their opinions, and their thoughts on things. Other elicitation techniques that can be used includes value stream analysis, or from manufacturing we call it value stream mapping, and that means plotting the route that something takes and figuring out where there are connections and delays and things of that nature. Another thing is doing financials review. That would include assessing return on investment, net profit, net present value, internal rate of review, and financial measurements, cost to benefit ratio, and payback. Those are other things. Those would be used to identify, to determine the strengths and weaknesses of an organization. Human resources review is an elicitation technique. Having resource management plan, resource breakdown structure, staffing plan, team performance assessment tools can determine internal capabilities, both good and bad, where you are capable, where you're lacking, the cultural aspects of your organization towards the project, whether groupthink is predominant. That means all the people together in an organization, they are biased just because they are associated with that organization. Determine how cohesive your organization is, and then determine the level of teamwork within your organization or towards the project and project team. Some other things that can be identified from internal strengths and weaknesses: the policies, procedures in an organization and their adherence to them, the tangible assets, property or equipment, inventory of your organization, the intangible assets, in other words, those things that you can't put your hand on, in other words, brand value or proprietary technology or patents, things of that nature. Your operational efficiencies, your product quality, your brand association, employee ability or employees' abilities, analyzing the capability of the individuals in your company, especially towards project team development, the ability for communications. Do you use push versus pull technique effectively? Is formal and informal the route of communication, and if there is indeed effective feedback processes? And then again, the organizational structure of your organization. So what can be learned from external opportunities and threats assessment? Examples of external opportunities: finding out a new technology that can significantly improve a product or service, growing demand for a niche market, favorable government regulations, positive shifts in consumer behavior. External threats: a new competitor entering the market with superior products, economic recession leading to reduced consumer spending, adverse regulatory changes, and technological advances that can either make whatever you're intending to do obsolete, or it might enhance your position. In this portion of the lecture, I'll discuss the difference between push versus pull communication technique and formal versus informal communication technique. Push versus pull communication technique. What's the difference? Push communication technique is where someone is actually pushing information towards a recipient, okay, without them requesting any information. Push communication is good for quick, regular communication and can be automated. An email is a primary example of that. Texting is a primary example of that. That is a classic example of push communication. I have on here reports, contracts, directives, things of those nature that somebody has to look at and then review. So that's examples of push communication. Then there's pull communication technique. Pull communication technique requires a recipient to access information. Generally speaking, when you get on the internet, a website is a pull technique. You get on there and the information is already hosted for you to look at it. Things like policies and procedures in your organization, they're there for you to refer to. You just have to go look them up. Work instructions are a primary example of that. It tells you how you are supposed to do something, and that is done so it is done repetitively, and you have standardized processes and products. There are informational brochures that organizations have that put out, so you know something about that organization you're dealing with. Knowledge repositories. Library is also a pull technique. You have to go there and look for the information, then you might find it in a book or whatever else. Databases and also information repositories. So pull communications passive. Recipients can get to the information. It's always there. You just have to pull the information to you. The graphic simply provides a reference point for you to do a comparison of push versus pull from a top-down executive perspective, or from the bottom up, and let's say a worker or somebody that's going to be a recipient of the information. So how does formal versus informal communication channels work? What are they? Okay, so effective communication channels include verbal, talking amongst each other; written, you write something down; face-to-face, when you're doing face-to-face, you can also read body language, which is a good way to determine what's being communicated in a different path. And then nonverbal communication, that might be a sign, or seeing a flashing light, a green light, a red light, something like that. And so the chart there, and so notice at the bottom that Marabian says that a researcher of body language concerning face-to-face communication indicates that about 55% of communication is nonverbal, while 38% is vocal and 7% is only words. Just a little interesting factoid. You probably won't see that on the CAPM exam if you choose to take that. But so on the chart at right, I have two columns. One says formal communication, the other says informal communication. So it's just a comparison. So the origin, the formal communication is deliberately structured. Somebody needs to inform you a certain way, and they're going to write things in a certain way. Might be passive, might be aggressive, might be neutral, might be assertive, things of that nature. The nature, it's well planned, systematic, and authorized. The flow, prescribed through a chain of command, typically top down or bottom up, to let someone know something. The flexibility of the formal command is communication is rigid. Authority, official channel. A formal communication would be to achieve business objectives. Speed, it takes time to do like a written email or write out a form, or if you've ever done as a supervisor, so have you, you might do an employee evaluation. That's definitely structured formal communication. Um, the form, it can be formal, can be oral or written. So you might document that you've had a conversation and then provide minutes with it. So minutes are a formal communication device. And then the source, you make it so it can be tracked. Informal communication, starting from the bottom up versus what we just talked about. Generally speaking, informal communication, you can't track it. A lot of times it's just hearsay, or you're gossiping, or you're just having off the top of your head conversation. It's typically oral. It's often distorted, not necessarily true, maybe somewhat fact-based or slightly fact-based. Usually it's fast. It's to satisfy your personal needs. A lot of times it's for emotional response reasons. So there's psychology that's involved with that. It's often unofficial. Informal would be unofficial. You're talking about something and you don't really want anybody to refer to it. You're just communicating to let somebody know your feelings on something. The flow, it's unofficial, can be on the phone, can be talking face to face, can be with pictures, things of that nature. The nature, it's generally informal communications unplanned, it's unsystematic and unauthorized. You're just having conversation. Often it's spontaneous and unstructured. Uh, you will be asked about formal and informal communication on the CAPM exam, so this would be something to refer to. I talked about the Racki matrix or Racki chart. So if you notice on the chart on the right hand side, I'll just talk about it this way. When you do a Racki analysis, let's say the stakeholders or whomever on your project team, or even the stakeholders you need to communicate, you might want to keep track of that information that you're going to usually push towards them. Okay, and so you might want to keep track of somebody in the project team or whatever stakeholder to let somebody know if this person is responsible for something. Okay, and so you'd have their name and you'd have their role, and then you might put R. So if it was a shift manager, they would be somebody to contact because they would be responsible for some outcome. Okay, there is accountable, so this would somebody that is responsible for making something works and works well. Then you would have consulted, so it's one of those things that they're important enough to know about it, but it might not be, they might not be all of that important in the scheme of things. And then just inform, those might be people that don't have a lot of power or influence, but they need ultimately to know what's going on. So that's the RACI of the Racki chart. Some steps for creating a Racki matrix: you list the project tasks, you identify key stakeholders, you assign a Racki matrix role for each, then you review and adjust, and then you share the chart with your team and the stakeholders. And you do that so they know when they're going to be communicated with over certain things, the level of importance regarding that information toward them. In this portion of the lecture, we'll talk about some things related to external opportunities and threats. Through elicitation techniques I discussed earlier, some things will be found regarding external opportunities and threats. Opportunities and threats can have positive and negative impact on the project and ultimately the outcomes on your organization. So a lot of times these are outside of the control of the project and the project team. And as for opportunities, opportunities are favorable conditions towards the success of your project. They could be a new market trend. You might be providing a new product per that new trend. You might develop new partnerships or develop new technologies. Threats would be things that are unfavorable conditions to the project's outcome. They would include what the competitors might do in response to what you've decided to do with that, based upon the outcome of your project. Unexpected regulatory changes when you're working on a project and suddenly the government comes up with a new law or regulation you're unaware of, or something happens in the marketplace that you didn't see coming, that can be a threat to it. And then economic downturns. Remember that both opportunities and threats involve risk. And because of that, risk assessment needs to be done. And I'll talk about risk assessment here in the next few slides. Risk assessment is a structured process that helps project teams identify, analyze, and manage potential risks that can have an impact on your project. The steps involved with risk assessment includes identifying the risks. I'll talk about failure mode effect analysis. Pretty much the same thing to say a risk assessment. In engineering, an FMEA is used quite a bit, and that is to kind of problem solve problems before they start, so you know how to address them. So you identify the risks, you assess the likelihood and their impact, you prioritize the risks, find out which ones are going to be of major factors and which will be minimal factors and may just be slight hindrances. You create a plan for how to deal with the risks that you've identified, and then you monitor and update throughout the course of a project regarding these risks. And again, all of this would be something that you would discuss when you're developing the business case, and that would then head towards the project charter. When doing a risk assessment, you want to plot those risks in what's called a risk register in project management. And the steps are as follows. You identify the risk to the project, whatever that may be. You determine the risk likelihood. Then you determine the impact scale of that risk. You calculate the risk rating, you develop a risk matrix, you create an acceptance criteria, then plans and response actions for it. As I said before, in engineering, it's called an FMEA. Over on the right side of this, I show that you would give a Likert scale and rate 1 to 5. So if it is a risk, but it's very slight that might happen, you might rate it a 1. If there's a high probability it would happen, you'd rate it a 5. And then on the impact scale, you would give, if it's a negligible impact, might just be an inconvenience, you might rate it a 1. If it is something that is very significant and even catastrophic and ruin your project, then you rate that a 4 or 5. And if you see down here, I give the ratings, how you would calculate it. So you take your likelihood times your impact, and that would give you your risk rating. So if you have a 5 times 5, that would be the max. And so 25 would be a high scale, high probability, catastrophic event that you need to plan for. Okay, so if you look at this chart that I have here at the bottom, it says that electrical leakage can cause severe accidents and fatalities, and then it says what the response action would be. So this would be an example, a brief example of what a risk register is. Just for the sake of reference, this gives an example of a FEMA plan, failure mode effect analysis, which in essence is a risk register. And so what happens is when you develop one of these, you say the potential use and why it might happen. Here's your potential failure. Here's the effects of the failure. You rate the severity of it. You have the potential causes, so there might not be just one cause, it can be several causes, so it's a little bit more involved than just a traditional risk register. Then you rate the probability of occurrence. You discuss the current process controls to ensure it doesn't happen. You detectability devices, and then you multiply all of those together, and then it tells you what your critical score is, and then you move on from there. In a FEMA, it's called a RPN. At this point, I need to talk about the types of risks in project management. There are cost risks, there's scheduling risks, there's performance risks, market risks, governance risks, legal risks, and environmental risks. These terms might be used generically in the CAPM exam, so just want to make you aware that they do exist. Terms that you will definitely need to know for the CAPM exam on how to respond to risks are these terms. There is escalate or escalation, avoid or avoidance, transfer or transference, mitigate or mitigation, and then accept or acceptance. And I'll talk about those in a second. Escalation means passing the risk or the threat upward. It's out of the spectrum of what you're supposed to be doing with the project management team. Likely your project management team has identified an issue that has come up. They've talked about it, at least they should talk about it, and say, hey, here's an issue here. We think this is outside of the spectrum of our capabilities. And then the project manager would likely notify the project sponsor and tell them to take care of it. When that happens, it might go to a third-party provider that would be used to mitigate that risk. The next term to know regarding risk assessment responses is avoidance. Avoidance means the team takes ownership of the problem and they try to eliminate that threat or the risk involved with it. So avoidance means that, okay, we understand it's there, we're going to do something about it, and we're going to try to navigate around this risk or this threat. Another risk response is transference. Transference involves shifting the ownership or the risk or the threat to a third party. They'll take care of it. They might use insurance or what have you, that if this risk or threat occurs, it's not going to impact us, especially if it's monetary or property of something of that nature. And so that is transference. Mitigation is one that you should be sure to know for the CAPM exam if you take it. Mitigation means that the project team is going to take on this risk or this threat, and they're going to take actions or take steps to try to repair it or minimize the damage, or try to, in essence, maybe avoid even the occurrence of whatever the risk or threat is. Another risk assessment response is acceptance. Acceptance means recognizing that a threat exists, passively accepting it, or developing a contingency plan to deal with it when it does occur. In this section, we'll talk about the business case, and we'll start off with who typically writes a business case. First of all, here's an example of a template that can be used for writing a business case. And notice this has a check mark to let you know once you've written the business case, you can check to see that you have things done. So if you notice, this is slightly different, but this is what the customer needs is, your market window or your drivers, proposed solutions, project organization, how complex it is, who's going to be the leader, who's the leadership team, does your competitive analysis, and that could be any one of those elicitation techniques I had talked about earlier, discusses the risks, here's ROI, or it could be payback period, or NPV, internal rate of review, and so forth. Here is discussing your target customers. In other words, those would be your stakeholders, key stakeholders. Here's your acceptance criteria, as talked about in PMI. So your critical success factors would be accepting that this is what you need or want. Here's the resources you're going to need. And again, here is criteria for indicating that there'll be success in doing this project. Who does the business case? Well, virtually anybody can write the business case, but typically it's somebody that understands the goals of the organization, the objectives of the project, and the business analysis aspects of why and how this would help be successful to your organization. So who can write it? A project or product sponsor. Might be a senior management type with the authority to influence um, the bottom line or responsible for the bottom line. A business analyst. A business analyst is somebody that's involved with the project management. Uh, they work with stakeholders, the project manager, the team members to identify business needs. They understand the business needs, structure, processes, policies, and operations of your organization. It could be a product owner. That's the person that is critical and represents the final outcome of the project. Can be a number of any person that will be a end user stakeholder, and as I said before, anyone that sees an opportunity, gap, or need. I introduced the term product owner. So what is a product owner? Product owner, they represent the customer, the stakeholder that is going to have to deal with the outcome based upon the project. They act as a proxy for the customer. Generally, it's an internal person to your organization, but they represent the needs and perspective throughout the entire project development process. They manage the product backlog. As I said before, product backlogs generally go with agile project management, and that would be iterative or incremental type of projects. And the backlog is stuff that needs to get done to complete the iterations or increments. And it's kind of a more or less a checklist of what we need to do to get done during that portion of the project. They prioritize work, they assess priorities, and they keep the backlog current. They define the product vision. So it talks that has to do with, here is a descriptive picture of what we want when the project is over, so the final outcome. They collaborate with stakeholders to include customers, senior management, marketing, sales, customer support, and so forth. They do not, however, necessarily provide the official communication and update regarding the project. That's the responsibility of the project manager. So the product owner is somebody that is strictly concerned with the final product and the outcome of the project to meet stakeholder concerns. And they're there to optimize the final product user experience. What does a product sponsor or product owner do? Product or project sponsors are senior management members who wield significant influence and authority, serving as a project proponent and decision maker. Often a person responsible for the project's overall success, including the appointing of a project manager. They overlook the assembly of the project team. They help define criteria for success for the project, and they help the project be delivered. Project sponsors product sponsors are often known by the names such as a product sponsor, project director, account manager, or business unit. A sponsor becomes an owner once the project is approved. Now, here's two terms that you need to be extremely knowledgeable on regarding the PMI exam, because you'll likely see this. The term verification is often used. Okay, verification is the first step of a process. Verification is the process of ensuring that a product meets specifications. For instance, if you have a blueprint, blueprints have dimensions, might be geometric dimension tolerancing. So it's kind of saying this is how we are going to make the product. Afterwards, validation is ensuring that the product meets the stakeholders' needs and solves problems. What I mean by solves problems is just because we designed this thing and whatever that product is at the end of the project, it may not live up to the expectations of the customer. They will have the final say, and they may say, oh, this is good, but this could be better. Okay, so verification is the first step, and that's internally what we do on the project management team. But validation is what might happen with the customer afterward. And they go, okay, you did give me what you want, but it's not exactly what I want, and it needs to be changed. Okay, so when you get a chance, take a look over the differences between the product owners and the project managers. With the end of this lecture, be able to determine elicitation techniques, especially if something is amiss with marketing and developing of the business case. Know the difference between SWOT analysis with internal investigation, internal to your organization being strengths and weaknesses, and then external is the opportunities and threats. And that often occurs by somebody outside of the organization, which is often a misunderstanding when people do SWOT analysis. Understand the difference between push versus pull, and formal versus informal communication. Understand how to assess opportunities and threats for risks. Know the 5 different risk responses. Know the difference between a project sponsor and a project owner. And also know that the product or project sponsor is responsible for writing the business case. They may not write it. Okay, that might even be the project manager who writes it, but at least they have some responsibility for it. With that said, I'll refer you to the next upcoming 3rd lecture. Thank you. Goodbye.